Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Ascended Live, as we celebrate America's 250th birthday. It's common to think about all the men that started it, right?
Sure.
And the founding fathers of America are some of the most poignant people in history.
Agreed.
But what if the stories that we see aren't necessarily what really happened? Now, you know history.
Yes.
And history is written by one person, one point of view, usually
Yes.
the winner.
The winner. Yep.
So there's a lot more to these famous men and women. And sometimes their lives just get missed.
Yeah, their real lives.
Their real lives
are often overlooked. Yes.
Yeah. And tonight we are here to share in that reality. And there's far more to appreciate and celebrate than the myths and legends that we tend to believe. So I'm Randy Burgoyne, a tech guy. This is Paul Maloy, historian and teacher. And, you know, I like to look at a finished product. Okay, polished apps, a seamless piece of software you install and run, sleek hardware like this nice MacBook that we're using right here. But any engineer will tell you that behind every great product is a history of catastrophic failures, intense bugs, brutal, sleepless nights.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. And having worked, 5 years of my life I spent in R&D, and I know some of the challenges of that. But too often in schools we teach American history the same way. We look at the finished product.
Yes.
Right? There's a lot of organizations too. You see Apple and IBM as these great big companies, polished. But what you don't remember is Steve Jobs
in a garage
and Steve Wozniak in a garage, plunking away.
Yes.
So you have to remember the beginnings. And I'll throw in a tech term. It was the beta test of America.
Yes.
So anyway, Paul.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell us the story, the real story.
So it's always great to be with you as we discuss different aspects of life and culture, looking at how we can live our lives in a better, balanced, more realistic, more productive way. And you're exactly right. By turning our founding fathers into immaculate myths, we actually do them a massive disservice. When we teach kids that Washington never told a lie or that the founders were always in agreement on everything, we remove their humanity. If they were demigods, then creating America wasn't hard for them. But they weren't demigods. They were regular human beings that had flaws. They made mistakes. They were often deeply stressed and highly vulnerable as human beings. They were really normal people thrust into perhaps abnormal, really unusual situations and scenarios. But the reality is that their heroism doesn't lie in a lack of struggle. It lies in the fact that they were risking everything with the very real possibility of losing everything. And some of them actually did lose everything. Right. But in the moments of their greatest testing, they pushed through anyway.
So let's dive into some specifics.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to share a little personal experience. Last night, I went and saw Young Washington, the movie.
I hear it's great. Haven't seen it yet.
Gosh.
Yeah.
It's okay. They stylized some things. They dramatized some things.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
But after reading some of the script and the comments and the critics, it's mostly like 95% historically accurate.
Wonderful. It's rare to see that from a historical movie, but yeah, good.
Yeah, and there's some pieces they softened to tell the story, and I think that's the thing you have to understand. But George Washington had a hard life. his first war he lost.
Yeah, that first battle during the French and Indian War. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He lost in that first battle. And then Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
From a modern perspective, we see their massive estates.
Yes.
We see the Washington Mount Vernon estate.
Yes.
We see Monticello. And we just assume that they had all these things for their whole lives.
Right.
So what was the reality?
Especially during that Revolutionary War time period. And it wasn't all glitz and glamour, and again, too often when you see a movie, even a well-intentioned movie, a lot of times what you get is the heroic elements without the struggle. And I will tell you another really great movie to watch. It stars Jeff Daniels as George Washington, and it's called The Crossing, when they crossed the Delaware River to make that famous Christmas raid in 1775. It's a marvelous 75, 76, I forget which year, but anyway, in that time frame. Marvelous movie, really well done, because then you get to see again the questions and the struggles of the men that were involved in the particular development, planning, and execution of that very well-known event. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the reality was a lot of compounding nightmare of debt and personal loss. Take Washington, when he took command of the Continental Army, he left Mount Vernon for 8 straight years. And that's another thing, is that we tend to think of we tend to know a little bit about the battles of Lexington and Concord at the beginning of the war. We know that there was the Declaration of Independence, and then we just assumed that the war ended. We don't know that it continued clear until 1783, and it's like, okay, lots happened.
There was a lot of British friendly people still living.
Yes, absolutely.
In the States.
Yeah.
And they had to either make a choice.
Yeah. And as far as Washington was concerned, he actually had a rather large, substantial plantation. But during his time of service, where he was not there, it fell into severe neglect. And while he's fighting a war against the world's greatest superpower, mind you, simultaneously receiving letters that his personal finances were collapsing. Yeah. And Jefferson was drowning in debt. His entire adult life, he was drowning in debt, largely inherited, but exacerbated by his lifestyle and the war that he was certainly involved with, very much involved with. But worse was the financial ruin, was the human toll, right? During the Revolutionary era, Jefferson lost his wife, also named Martha, and 4 of his children died in infancy. When he was writing the words of our foundation, the Declaration of Independence, he was grieving. He was brokenhearted. And I think we don't get that most of the time, right? He didn't write the Declaration from a place of comfort and academic leisure. He wrote it under the crushing weight of profound personal loss.
Yeah. Well, that's, it's a heavy burden to carry. And I think that to build a country, we don't understand what it took. What it took to build the country, to say, what are its founding principles? And I remember looking at some paintings, I think it was historic paintings and it wasn't the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence that they were writing. These were other liberty declaring documents that went out. There was much more ahead of time, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely there was.
And
other efforts, if you will, to try to create some sense of government.
Yeah. Kind of like creating a new business. You set up your systems.
Yeah.
And find things that work, things that don't work.
Yeah.
And things that don't work, you don't do.
Right. But some of them had to be implemented before they realized this is not working.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And such was with the document that was known as the Articles of Confederation, that was written by the same group of men that actually participated in helping Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence. It was that same Continental Congress. But okay.
So what about the outliers? So
right.
Like Benjamin Franklin.
Which is interesting to think of him as an outlier, very much a founding father.
Yeah.
But not in the same way as Jefferson and Adams and Washington. Yes.
Or Hamilton.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So Hamilton came from virtually nothing.
Right.
But how did the struggle, see, and I think in the movie they portray very well how Washington's struggles in the beginning shaped him to be a great general, colonel, a major, and eventually general.
When I usually am teaching my students about George Washington, I always back up into his youth and young adult life, because it's only when you understand his role during the French and Indian War, where he's fighting with the British, that you begin to understand where he got the knowledge of British tactics and the skill to command men, which came again making mistakes. He made mistakes, and those, I understand, are portrayed in the movie Young Washington.
They are. They're portrayed, and while I was watching that, I thought, I think that would be valuable in 20 years when he's fighting the British for real. Right.
And then all the stuff that happened under his command during the Revolutionary War will go on to influence how he leads a new country as our nation's first president. So no lesson is wasted. No effort is forgotten in terms of what he knew, and then leveraged that deep understanding and experience to be able to lead a new nation that was experimental from every possible conceivable angle you can think of. Yeah, absolutely. So Franklin is famous for his wit and charm. But by the time the revolution rolled around, he was an old man. He was suffering from agonizing gout and kidney stones.
Oh,
yeah.
Man, no wonder he was kind of dangerous at times.
Well, sometimes, yeah, absolutely. And you have to think that travel in the 18th century was far from comfortable, yet he spent years sailing back and forth, rough seas, weeks on end on sailing ships back in that time frame, and in drafty carriages traversing Europe. He was leveraging his remaining health to secure the French alliance during our Revolutionary War, which we would have lost had it not been for our successful alliance with France. And sometimes, again, we forget that. We simplify our Revolutionary War, and we almost entirely leave out the fact that if it hadn't been for the support of France, there'd have been no way that we could have completed that war and would have forced Britain to a surrender and a truce. But that notwithstanding, so that was all done by Benjamin Franklin. So also during the war, it tore his family apart. Another thing that we don't know very well is that Franklin had a son named William Franklin, who remained a staunch loyalist. You were said earlier that America was divided. There were loyalists from north through the south. In fact, the British thought that the South colonies would actually stand by them. Georgia was named after King George. Okay. And so they thought that the southern colonies would actually support them. And at one point, they moved their base of operations from the northern colonies to the southern colonies, thinking that that's what would happen. And surprisingly, it didn't. But it didn't happen that way in large measure because of men like Jefferson, like Thomas Paine, like the other founding fathers that were very much influencing how the American colonists thought and felt, and in some cases, totally rubbing their loyalist neighbors in the wrong way and causing adversarial relationships. So Franklin's son remained a loyalist through his dying day. And Hamilton, Hamilton really was like the ultimate outsider, born into poverty and illegitimacy in the West Indies, orphaned as a boy. He had no family safety net. Every single thing Hamilton achieved, he had to fight for with what we would think of as a manic, exhausting work. He did suffer from chronic illness, likely malaria that he had to deal with in his youth and during the war. He worked himself to the bone as Washington's aide-de-camp, constantly battling a system that lacked funds to feed and clothe the fellow soldiers. And very often didn't get the recognition from those that he was trying to help. And so there was emotional wounds as well as the financial issues that he was dealing with.
Yeah, wow, that's great. And Paul, when we look at the Declaration of Independence, we tend to focus on certain lines like life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
But the very last line says that they mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Right.
And that wasn't just poetic prose for the signers.
Right.
That was effectively a self-signed death warrant.
Yes.
If their name is signed on it and King George sees that, right?
Yes.
So what were some of the worst consequences suffered by these individuals?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who signed the documents?
Yeah. And again, largely most of these men who signed the document, the Declaration of Independence, 55 men, they've gone unacknowledged, I suppose, at the very best, and unknown.
John Hancock.
Yes, absolutely. Which John Hancock said when he signed his, supposedly he said, "I want King George to know how much I support this document." But you said, it was a declaration of treason.
Yeah.
Which meant that when they were making that signature against the British Crown, the penalty for treason was hanging. Now get this. Okay, get this. We think about hanging and we hear the terms quartering and also drawing, or drawing and quartering.
Yeah.
And here's the reality is that you would think, well, they're going to hang, they're going to die. But added to that was a symbolic. They would be drawn and they would have their wrists and their ankles tied, and they would be pulled apart. And then quartering was literally a severing of the body into pieces as a way of saying that this person is destroyed and has no, at that point, you don't even put them into a coffin. You don't put them into a plot in a cemetery. There is nothing to bury.
You put the remains in a
right.
dirt hole.
So that symbolic death penalty was very much known by the signers of the Declaration, and they signed anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So Richard Stockton of New Jersey was captured by loyalists. So fellow American colonists, right? He was captured by loyalists, thrown into a jail in New York and starved and subjected to freezing conditions. His health was permanently destroyed. His estate was pillaged, and he died in poverty before the war even ended.
Wow.
Francis Lewis of New York had his home completely destroyed, and his wife was captured by the British. She was kept in such squalid conditions without a bed or proper food that her health collapsed, and she died shortly after her release. So there you go. Francis Lewis loses his wife as a direct result of his involvement signing the Declaration of Independence. You imagine the guilt that he would have felt through that. Right. Another one that is fairly well documented is John Hart of New Jersey. He had to run away. His wife was dying, and he had to literally escape out of the house as British troops swept through. His 13 children fled for their lives. His farm was ravaged. He spent months sleeping in forests and caves, hunted like an animal. He returned home broken in health to find his wife dead and his family completely scattered.
Mm.
They didn't just risk fortunes, Randy. They lost them. And they were hunted, their families were targeted, and many died broken and penniless.
Wow. Yeah, and as we talk about a lot of these things, there's so much that we could cover.
Yes.
And it'd be nice just to go on and on and on.
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to give a sneak peek in September.
Okay.
September, there's Constitution Day, and I would like to do an episode talking about the long and difficult road to creating the Constitution of America. Because again, you might think, well, they just came up with a document, they signed that document.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson.
And they created
yeah.
But the how it came to be is complicated, and the arguments that ensued in developing that document are well documented, and yet we don't really hear or know them. So that's like a part 2 for what we'll finish covering tonight.
Part of my job now as an analyst, see, IT guys don't retire, they just become analysts.
Right.
Is creating documents.
Yeah.
But if you have a committee that looks at a document,
right, and everybody wants to have
everybody has their input on it.
Yes,
it'll go months, and months, and rewrites, and additions, and comments, and throw that one out and create a new one.
Yes,
and they didn't have word processors.
No, no, they did not.
So, all right, your insights here are just awesome. They drive home the point that, for true heroism, these men really were more than just a fairy tale that we teach in schools. And I don't necessarily want to call it a fairy tale, but in some cases we do. We glorify Christopher Columbus, and yet he was.
We either glorify him or we vilify him,
right? Depending on what you're talking about, because of so many things that we would consider now as being inappropriate or uncouth or whatever, but to them it was doing business, right?
Right.
So we have to remember that they lived in a different time. We don't understand. We can't always look through our lens at the past.
I'm so glad that you say that, because all too often, again, not just my students, but we in our generation, we judge our ancestors by our standards, and that is unfair.
You're right. Yeah. So why is it so vital that we elevate them as true heroes? Precisely because of their flaws and struggles rather than despite them? Right?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And part of that, Randy, is because if we teach children that the founders were perfect, mythical heroes who never felt fear, never made mistakes, never suffered, we make their examples unachievable. We teach the next generation that to do great things, you must be flawless, which is not only incorrect, it's actually inappropriate. It doesn't give them then the basis, the foundation from which they can develop and feel like that even as they make mistakes, they are still moving forward, right? So when you show them the truth that Washington was losing his wealth and questioning his own military capabilities, which he didn't make that public, he was very close to the vest, as they say. Jefferson was crying over his lost children, that the signers were sleeping in caves to avoid the gallows, and that they still chose to stand up and build something greater than themselves. That is true heroism, and we oversimplify. We've mentioned this before on our podcast, that we have a tendency to oversimplify our history, whether it's American history, world history, our own the history of our ancestors, right? The
Mhm.
struggle is exactly what makes them monumental. They weren't statues, they were flesh and blood, and they chose courage over comfort. And that is the history that we need to remember.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. And I can see in my mind some things that have happened in my lifetime, and definitely in my parents' lifetime, where they struggled.
Mm-hmm.
Both my parents were born during
Mhm.
the Depression, right?
Right.
They struggled through that era. They came out of it. They became the greatest generation that we call them, right? And we're
Right.
baby boomers,
Yeah.
right? We're
Right. Yep.
the post-war baby boomers that has never been replicated. They've tried, but the point is history is becoming compressed.
Yeah.
So that what we see as a historical event, we think needs to happen in a few days.
Yeah.
Or you see somebody on social media, they give a little historical view of their life challenge, how they overcame it. And you think, yeah, I can do that. Well, you don't see that it took them 40 years to
Right.
do it.
Right.
And so that's a struggle that we have to come through. And that's part of our current society.
Right. Right. Or when you look at people who have been successful, whether you're looking at Sam Walton or Elon Musk, you don't see the decades of effort
Yes.
that each year they're building a little bit and a little bit. Now, at some point, there's an exponential growth of
Right.
wealth, and that's mathematical understood. But again, it started when both had, not much,
Right.
and the decisions that they made in their younger years ultimately, it's the genesis of what they become later. But when we say later, it's not a week later, it's not a month later, it's not a year later, it's decades later. And again, we tend to want to compress everything down into a nice, neat little tidy package. I remember the first time that I started really diving into the American Civil War, which was just a smidge over 4 years. 5 Aprils is there's actually a book called Across 5 Aprils. And what's interesting is that when you look at the dates of the battles, both small and large, you realize that over the course of 4 years, there was not a lot of fighting. And that's hard to comprehend when you look at something like Gettysburg or Vicksburg or any of the big battles. And we recognize that tens of thousands of people were involved, and in some cases, tens of thousands were wounded or killed. What we don't see, though, is the days or weeks of positioning and trying to manipulate how you're going to engage the enemy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of interesting that, again, it's like, well, we know this battle, we know this battle, we know this battle, we know this battle, and maybe nothing else happened. Well, that's not true, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There's always another story to be told.
Right.
Yeah. There's always page 2.
Page 536.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So one last question.
Okay.
Which of the founding fathers do you think suffered the most personal loss for cause? And I'll add a little something to it. And how did that shape our country?
Right. Okay. So, we were talking about personalities. Keep in mind that strong personalities are often opposing each other. So an example would be that John Adams is a fascinating study in psychological struggle. He was incredibly anxious, deeply insecure in actuality, and constantly overshadowed by Washington's fame and Franklin's charm. He spent years away from his wife, his beloved wife, Abigail. suffering from severe bouts of what today we would recognize as deep depression and anxiety. The rifts between Adams and Jefferson, they could never agree on anything. And then also between Hamilton and Jefferson were intensely bitter. And Hamilton and Jefferson, for the most part, were in the same philosophical vein.
Yeah.
Okay. Adams and Jefferson were antithetical to each other, and
Different parties
called each other tyrants and subversives and traitors to the revolution. Hamilton and Adams openly loathed each other, despite being in the same political party. So, when you think about all of this, it's easy to see John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and see their contributions. But Adams sacrificed years of his family life, living in lonely, cold European apartments, completely isolated. But in terms of sheer drama, I think it's Jefferson's loss of his wife and children, combined with the destruction of his financial security, presents him as a truly tragic figure. And yet, again, they both poured into the effort of creating this new country with what was left of their souls. And it's remarkable to see how they were hurting, how they were in constant conflict, and yet driven and committed to seeing the American experiment be a success.
And through their challenges, there's a thread of what they called in the movie Young Washington, they called it thread of providence.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So providence was what an act of God.
Yes.
Yes. An influence of deity.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I think a lot of faithful people of any religion feel and understand how the founding fathers were inspired. Inspired
even when some of them weren't overtly aware that they were being inspired.
Right.
We talk about God works in mysterious ways, and in many cases, we could say providence, the Holy Spirit, whatever you want to term that, was at work impressing certain principles on the hearts of these founding fathers and ultimately putting them in position where they could make a difference.
Yeah.
Both individually and, of course, collectively.
Right. And I think that that's the sign of a real, true, inspired person is that they don't want to be the outstanding one. They want to be a servant. They want to be serving and building.
And it's interesting you bring that up because one of the things, Washington was repeatedly reluctant to become the leader. He was offered the supreme commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, which he agreed to do, but only reluctantly, and in part because there were other men that were far less capable that were volunteering to take on that role. And he thought, that may not work as well. And we needed somebody that was seen from the outside as being calm and collected and skilled and knowledgeable. And Washington was all of those things, but that doesn't mean that he didn't fight certain inner demons at certain times. And then when the Constitution was done, and in September we'll cover this, he was reluctant to go to the Constitutional Convention. He didn't think that he would have anything important to add. And then following that, when he was nominated to be the first president, which still required a vote, he didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And then he was convinced to run for a second term, which he didn't want to do that. He wanted to go home and just be a farmer. But in every case, he felt like what he could bring, not just to the country, but for the country, overshadowed perhaps his personal needs. And by the end of his second term, so he was a president for 8 years, and he kind of set that as a pattern. When he finally went home to Mount Vernon, he only survived another 3 years before he passed away.
Wow. He just wore himself out in the service of the country.
Yes.
Wow. Well, that's all the time we have for today. What an amazing story. And these are just little snippets.
Yeah.
There's so much.
There's so much more.
Much more that we could. So thank you, Paul, for bringing all this. This has been a fabulous to learn about these historical giants and appreciate their height of achievements. And thank you for everybody that's tuned in, both of you. And
for all those who will listen later.
Yeah, that's right. There will be a lot of listen laters. We do have a new microphone. It's a stereo microphone, so maybe you've noticed a little better sound, or
we hope
left and right. Not politically, right?
Yeah, right.
But be sure to subscribe, like, and share. Also, visit us on the podcast. If you don't necessarily want to see our faces, you can go to your favorite podcast app and pick it up audio only. So there you go.
There you go.
So thank you all. And until next time, have a happy Independence Day. 50 years.
250 years. Against all the odds.
Yeah, that's right. Longer than a lot of other countries.
And not nearly as long as some.
That's right.
We got a long way